Hello and welcome to the Miles to Zen podcast. I'm so glad you found your way to this podcast today. And if you are a returning listener, thank you so much. Last September, I left my corporate career of nearly 2 decades and told everyone I was going on a creative sabbatical for a year. And I didn't have a rigid plan. I just knew that I needed space. I wanted to slow down, be more present, observe more, do less, and just see what bubbled up. And this is episode 2 in our newly created Creative Soul series. And we're diving into the heart of creativity, not as a talent or a performance, but just as a deeply human way of connecting to joy, intuition, and your most authentic self. So I'll still be interviewing inspiring guests, and I'll be interspersing those with these solo episodes, all devoted to the messy, beautiful magic of creativity. So last time we kicked things off talking about how everyone is creative, yes, even you. And that creativity isn't just for artists, poets, or painters. It's how you solve problems. It's how you tell a story. It's how you doodle, even if you don't know how to draw. You don't need talent. You need curiosity. You need courage. And mostly you need space. That's the thing about authentic creativity, authenticity. You don't need an audience to be the real you. You need a safe space. Now, this idea of safe space for creativity can feel a little abstract, like, what does that even mean and where do we find it? And funnily enough, in next week's episode, I'll be chatting with self-leadership coach Ruth Andermatt about self-trust. And we spoke back in March, and self-trust really links to creativity because first and foremost, you need a safe space within you. And whether you call yourself an artist, a creator, a content barista, yes, I just made that up, or just someone who's exploring their creative side, this safe space is an inside job to start with. So let's think about those moments when you were creating from your heart, when you're in flow, whether it's a podcast, a design, a new way of doing something. Maybe if you can't think of anything, think of those times when you were doing those things as a kid. What did you need? You needed freedom from judgment, freedom from perfectionism. You needed permission to be your full, quirky, weird, courageous self. And when you feel free to explore and experiment without fear of rejection or judgment, your most delicious ideas can bubble to the surface. They don't need to be perfect. You certainly don't need an audience. They don't need to make you money, although it's always nice. They just need to be authentic and aligned with you. And so how do you know you found a creative safe space? And it's definitely, as we discussed, it's not always a physical space, it's a feeling. And I know when I found mine because time tends to evaporate. I don't feel any pressure. There's a freedom there, like just a shaking out of your shoulders kind of feeling. I don't care about the outcome. And often I will leave with more energy than when I started. So it's like being in the zone. Athletes talk about being in the zone. Artists talk about it. A really good speaker, you can see that they're in a zone. And you're not creating for anyone else. You're creating because you have to. And if you know that feeling, you really know that feeling. So for me, creativity usually starts with a spark, an image, a random thought, a problem to solve. And these creative sparks don't usually happen when you're sitting at a desk. They can happen that way, but they usually happen for me in one of two places. Well, one is more a state of being, when I'm in motion, when I'm walking, or when I'm absorbed in doing something else, or when I'm in nature, or the very first few minutes of when I wake up. And most often it comes through in silence. So my big creative breakthroughs really came for me as a desire to find joy. And as I looked for joy, I found my creative self, or I reconnected to that creative self. Because when we're in alignment with our authentic selves, what are we looking to do? We're looking for joy, for contentment, for enchantment, for a life that lights us up. And in corporate, I would have the best conversations with people when we peeled back a few layers of those onions and started talking about their creative pursuits. And I got to see often some things that were really unexpected, like a deep passion for bird photography, a sense of returning to self when molding pottery. And of course, we can think of that deep feeling artist. And yes, that's an awesome way to express oneself and to be creative. And this is why I think so many teenagers and people in their early 20s make the best music, because there's such deep feelings in that period, and a lot of them. I think that creativity is deeply tied to intuition. And this idea of allowing space to listen to that intuition is so interesting. So people think that you can just pick up a book and start doodling, or sit at a laptop and come up with a brilliant concept. But a way easier way to access that creativity is, where do you feel most you? And where do you feel most at home with your true self? Now, we've talked about this in past episodes with Elise Cathry, with Monica Chugnell, and even the one on intuition with Doug Bites. And your body gives you clues, and art helps us to tap into that intuition and where our body's giving us clues. So often we hear phrases in business like trust your gut. I think one day, more businesses will be comfortable with the language of listening to your intuition, especially because, some really famous people have talked about intuition, like Steve Jobs. One of his favorite quotes was, intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect. And he also said, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition, because they already know who you truly want to become. Isn't that awesome? Because really, I think this journey of ours is so much about coming back to who we truly are. And when you think of all the great creative work that Steve Jobs did, there was a ton of creative thinking that came from his way of being. And I was also thinking about Frida Kahlo recently, because if you saw my latest Instagram post, you'll know I was unintentionally channeling her thanks to a very dusty environment. But seriously, Frida is the embodiment of someone who had authentic creativity. She used her art to express her life, her pain, her joy. And from what I read, she didn't see herself as a teacher, because she believed that no one should criticize someone else's art. And the reason this is interesting is because some of us learn to create art for approval, to stand out, to get compliments, to please. And somewhere in our performance loop, our authentic creative selves just got quieter. I think we talk about this in the podcast with Julie Jo Hughes. And one more thing that Steve Jobs said that really stuck with me is, don't let the noise of other people's opinions drown out your inner voice. So we don't need an audience. We need authenticity, and we need self-trust, and we need space. And can you remember when that happened to you, when you got lost in a creative flow? And it doesn't matter what the medium was, just remember how it felt when your heart was singing and your mind was quiet. And for me, photography has done that, and painting more recently has certainly done that. And I would just go into my studio, turn on my most empowering playlist, grab my paints, and just let the colors merge. And it's pure joy and simple and easy. As life got busy, I turned to writing because I didn't have the time to go painting. And every morning, sometime between 5 and 7, I would write, even if it was for just 10 minutes, stories, musings, whatever came through. I didn't edit. I just got thoughts and ideas on paper. And In the Artist's Way, the book by Julia Cameron, she talks about just her morning writing, where she encourages people to just write 3 pages of anything that comes to their mind. And it's kind of the same thing that I was doing. I just didn't know that that was called morning pages. And I found that some of my best ideas came from that. I have so many stories that I've either written or developed from those morning pages. And I'll certainly talk more about creative writing and free writing in a future episode. But over the last 10 years or so, I'd say I've become a lot more of a conscious creator, meaning I'm creating something for the conscious act of bringing in joy, and also because I had an idea that needed to be expressed. These ideas, these paintings, these writings may never find an audience, but for me, creativity is definitely a way to access joy and to access authenticity and bring my whole self into my life. So here's my invitation to you this week. Take a moment, brainstorm what creative acts make you feel the most you. And they don't need to be traditionally creative. You could be gardening. You could be making a specific kind of meal. You could be doing woodworking. You could be creating a video game. Whatever is the thing for you that makes you feel the most you. Not being a mom or dad, a parent, not being a partner, not your career, just you, your heart, your soul. What lights you up when nobody's paying attention? And what frees you to create from a place where there's no self-judgment. You're just showing up with an open mind and you're playing. You're just having fun. I'd love to hear what comes up for you. What makes your heart sing? What do you do that makes you feel truly, authentically you? It could be even dancing. It could be a martial arts sequence that you're making up. It could be anything. Thank you so much for listening to the Miles to Zen podcast this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, subscribe, follow, do all the things depending on where you're listening. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from my listeners and what's resonating. So until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and open your mind for the next creative act, no matter how small.